Brian Gutekunst and the Green Bay Packers are certain to make some roster changes in the very near future. What do I mean by that? Before I get into it, if you like the content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Okay, so if you haven't known, I've been talking about the Packers all week as far as free agents. Who are the free agents for the Packers heading into 2024 season? Who should they keep? Who should they move on from? Also, just scratching the surface on positionally, who should the Packers be looking at in the draft this upcoming season? Again, just scratching the surface on that. But let's get into it. When we start talking offensive linemen, we've already covered running backs, we've covered wide receivers, tight ends, quarterback. Today, we are covering offensive linemen for the Green Bay Packers. Under contract for the Packers this season, David Bakhtiari, Eldon Jenkins, Josh Myers, Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, Sean Ryan, Royce Newman, Luke Tenuta, Telfort, and then free agents for the Packers are Nyman, John Runyon, and Caleb Jones. Okay, so the name that of course stands out to everybody when we start talking about who the Packers have currently under contract is a guy in David Bakhtiari. And when I start talking, the Packers are bound to make some certain roster changes. This guy is at the top of that list. And here's what I mean by that. Okay, so we all know Bakhtiari. We save a bunch of money if we drop this guy, but Packers have to make a decision by March 15. Okay. So they cannot, there's no more wait and see. Is this guy's knee going to be healthy with all of his numerous surgeries on this knee? Is he going to be healthy for this upcoming season? He could potentially be, but that is way too much of a risk, way too much of a gamble than I think that Brian Gutekunst is willing to roll the dice on. I think Brian Gutekunst certainly moves on from Bakhtiari, and they save nearly $20.9 million in cap space by moving on from him. If they were to keep him and then trade him or whatever, he has to pass physicals, all this stuff. Okay, so this guy has so many implications on his contract. It's crazy if you break it all down. I'm not going to do that in this video. Long story short is the Packers are without a doubt going to absorb $20 million no matter what they do when it comes to Bakhtiari's contract. But if they move on from this guy, they save nearly $20.9 million in cap space. They need to move on from him. I don't see a world where Brian Gutekunst keeps this guy. Okay, another guy on the roster on their books currently, Royce Newman. Again, I don't see a world where the Green Bay Packers keep Royce Newman. He has just been kind of this thorn in the side for the Packers. He looks good once in a while, but more times than not, Royce Newman just does not look like a starting guy in Green Bay. They need to move on from him. If they do, they free up nearly $2.8 million in cap space. So between the two, between Bakhtiari and Royce Newman, there's nearly 24 million dollars ish or so in cap space that they can free up. I see them moving on certainly from Royce Newman. Another guy that is a free agent that they should think about signing that they may not be able to get is John Runyon. He was in the rotation with Sean Ryan. Obviously, Sean Ryan is the better offensive lineman there. He is going to keep that starting position, especially because he's cheaper on the books. That being said, the Packers most certainly will use Sean Ryan as their starter, but Runyon would make a fantastic swing interior lineman should they decide to throw some money at him. But he says he wants to stay in Green Bay. Runyon does, but he's going to have to be okay being a backup. Again, I think he would make a very good swing interior lineman. Okay, so the Green Bay Packers, a guy that has absolutely stood out that is Rasheed Walker. Okay, so should the Packers start this guy at left tackle, he's proved that he's very good. This guy is very good, and he's only going to get better over time. Rasheed Walker, do they just keep this guy, or do they use him as a swing guy and then go in the draft? Okay, so if they were to look to the draft in the first round, what is a guy that they should be looking at? Troy Fontenot, obviously that guy out of Washington. He's probably number one on my books that the Packers should be looking at. Should he fall to the Green Bay Packers and they keep him? He would make a fantastic starter in this league. And if the Packers do decide to use their first round pick and he falls to the Packers, this is the guy that's number one on my board for the Packers. Obviously, another guy out of Duke is Graham Barton, guard. So I think this guy would make a very good offensive linemen in the league. I think the Packers need to be looking at either of these two guys in the league. Obviously, Packers with 11 picks this year, and with the guys that they could be potentially losing. And if we start talking about John Runyon and David Bakhtiari and Royce Newman, all those guys, if they lose all those guys, they're going to obviously have to fill those positions in the draft with all the draft capital they've got. Who's number one on your book, on your board for the Packers to take in this draft? I'm curious. What are your thoughts out there? Should they roll the dice and keep Bakhtiari? I don't see a world where that happens, but are there anybody out there that's hoping that the Packers do retain David Bakhtiari? Royce Newman, I think the Packers should move on from him. Let me know your thoughts on that. And obviously, I want to know your thoughts. Who should the Packers take in the draft? Go, Pack, go.